Hello, my name is Sharon Payas. I'm with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Homeland Security Investigations, Victim Assistance Program and Management Oversight Unit. I want to welcome you today to the Homeland Security Investigations webinar entitled Financial Crimes Prevention and Protection. Before I give you a brief overview of the purpose of this webinar, I'd like to introduce my co-presenters as well. First off is Senior Training Program Manager Scott Santoro from the Department of Homeland Security, Federal Law Enforcement Training Centers. Also, National Program Manager and Special Agent Carl Andren, who is with Homeland Security Investigations, Illicit Finance and Proceeds of Crime Unit. And last but not least, we have National Program Manager Donna Hatfield with Homeland Security Investigations Victim Assistance Program. So let me give you a little bit of background about this webinar and the collaboration. This was developed in partnership with the U.S. Department of Elder Justice Initiative and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Homeland Security Investigations. As part of the 2015 White House Conference on Aging, the Department of Justice committed to provide training to prosecutors, victim specialists, advocates, and law enforcement on the issue of elder abuse. The Department of Homeland Security, in conjunction with the Department of Justice Elder Justice Initiative, is presenting this webinar as part of this very important effort, and we welcome you again. The Department of Homeland Security, DHS, was formed after the events of 9/11. We have 22 separate agencies that fall under DHS. These agencies or components consist both of operational and support components, as you can see by this slide. At this point, I want to talk to you a little bit more about U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, also known as ICE. It's an operational component of the department. ICE is comprised of three main directorates: Homeland Security Investigations, also known as HSI, Enforcement and Removal Operations, also known as ERO, and Management and Administration. One thing I'd like to point out is that, unfortunately, ICE equals deportation to most individuals. It's not well known as a criminal investigative agency authorized to investigate federal crimes that may impact any and all citizens. Although ICE's ERO does actively apprehend undocumented individuals, this presentation today is focused on ICE's investigative resources. So now let me talk to you a little bit about the largest investigative arm of the department, HSI. It is a critical U.S. asset in disrupting and dismantling criminal activity that illegally exploits America's travel, trade, financial, and immigration systems. I'd like to point out that ICE HSI enforces over 400 statutes. This is similar to FBI. We're comprised of many divisions: domestic operations, information management, investigative programs, international affairs, intelligence, mission support. We also have an Intellectual Property Rights Coordination Center and the National Security Investigations Division. But I want to spend a little bit of time talking to you today about a very special program within HSI, the Victim Assistance Program, which is also referred to as VAP. The VAP's goal is to help ensure justice for all victims and support successful victim-centered investigations. And what I mean by that is that we place equal value on the prosecution of the target, as well as ensuring that the victims receive the services they require and they're stabilized. This is not only due to statute, but it's also the right thing to do. Through the VAP, victims are provided appropriate resources and victim assistance, and by a couple of ways. Identifying potential victims' needs during the investigation, such as at the very beginning of an operational planning stage. That is, locating the shelters that might be needed for the victims, mental health providers, financial assistance. And secondly, providing on-site victim assistance support during that investigation. And what I mean by that is providing that individual food, clothing if it's needed. Very often they come to us with just the clothes on their back. Emotional support, explaining the judicial process, and providing resources in which the victim can contact when needed. You're going to hear more about important resources later on in this webinar that will assist the victims with tips on how to protect their financial interests, recognize the red flags of scammers, and protect themselves from further financial victimization. Now I want to talk to you a little bit more about the actual victim assistance specialists. I talked to you about the program. Our victim assistance specialists, there are 23 that are located throughout the United States. They assist victims by locating aging specialists for evaluations and emotional support. They provide assistance in obtaining investigative or police reports if needed, and also financial institutions if they need some sort of a reporting. Assistance in locating local and accessible financial support services is all part of that, and guiding victims to an appropriate and specialized agency for more individualized and detailed financial assistance in restoring their financial solvency and their identity. So now I'm going to turn the next segment of our webinar presentation over to Mr. Scott Santoro and Special Agent Carl Andren.
Hi, this is Scott Santoro with the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, and at this point I want to talk a little bit about the different types of financial crimes and some causes of financial exploitation. Financial crimes are often targeted toward our most vulnerable populations. Today we're really focusing on the elderly as that population. Some of the examples of potential financial exploitation of our elderly will include stealing their identity, often known as identity theft, telemarketers who are going to prey upon their kindness, trying to convince them to buy into lotteries that are maybe foreign lotteries, which we know are scams, phishing scams where they're trying to act like they know them and ask for some personal information, posing maybe as a bank or someone else, and finally some mass marketing schemes. Let's start with identity theft. Identity theft occurs when one wrongfully obtains and uses another person's personal data that in some way involves fraud or deception, typically for economic gain. The most common way this occurs is when the criminal enterprise steals one's personal identifying information. Now, as you can see on the slide in front of you, the most common forms of PII, as we call it, are going to be stealing one's name, date of birth, address, social security number, bank account information, etc. So why do these thieves want to steal other people's identity? Well, simply put, it's because that way they can gain access to resources and services and goods, or even maybe get out of being arrested. You see, they'll use these other folks' identity to obtain medical care, to possibly gain employment, because they themselves may have felonies or other items on their criminal history or financial history or credit history that might prevent them from getting certain jobs. They may be non-entitled to government benefits, but by stealing one's identity, they're now able to get those benefits. They may now be able to rent an apartment or a house or something that, again, they couldn't do with their own identity, i.e. their own credit. And lastly, when stopped by law enforcement, they can give the name and date of birth of someone else who may not have criminal warrants or may not have a criminal history. How big is this problem of identity theft? Well, as you can see on the slide in front of you, it's huge. Look at just some numbers from 2012 and 2014. We're talking in the billions here, folks. Here's what's interesting. When you look at this slide, you might think, wow, we're really doing a good job, because we can see that the profits from identity theft dropped significantly between 2012 and 2014. But here's the problem when we go to the next slide. So when we look at comparisons between the numbers between 2012 and 2014, as I said, there's been a big drop in the profits, which is great. But here's what I want to bring your attention to. Look at the bullet that talks about the number of victims. You see how it went up in these 2 years. Unfortunately, we're seeing more people victimized, even though there may be less profit. So on the one hand, I guess one could argue criminals are making less money, but on the more important hand, more people are being victimized than ever before. When it comes to the financial institutions that have been notified, that stayed about the same. But look at that number of elderly victims. 500,000 more were identified over that 2-year period. When looking at the areas where the breaches of one's identity was reported stolen, you can see the number one is still the e-commerce industry or the business industry. Buying things online, basically. Stealing one's credit card, getting that credit card to work properly online. The next big area is the fraud, the stealing that's being done in the medical field. And then afterwards you can see how the rest of these three, whether government, banking, and credit information and education services fall. So you might be asking, well, who commits identity theft? Believe it or not, a lot of them are relatives, which makes sense. That individual already knows the individual's name, address, date of birth, in some instances even their social security number. We also see ex-spouses, significant others, friends, coworkers. Remember now, we're talking about older adults. Something else I just want to point out to you is also caregivers, those in trusted positions. And what's really frustrating is even attorneys have been known to steal persons' identity for identity theft. Now, when you look at these numbers on the slide, you can see that over 43% of the victims actually knew their offender. And the vast majority were often the adult children, spouses, and these partners. So what happens when a victim's identity is stolen? We want you to make sure to alert individuals that they need to immediately place a fraud alert on their credit reports, close any accounts that they may have open that may be accessed by that stolen identity. Obviously, file a police report right away. File a complaint with the Federal Trade Commission. I'm going to turn it over now to Special Agent Carl Andren because he's going to tell us about an actual case involving identity theft where the fraudster, the criminal, actually stole the identity of an American veteran.
Thank you, Scott. I'm Special Agent Carl Andren with Homeland Security Investigations. This is a case of No Arturo Castillo. He was sentenced in federal court in October of 2015 in connection with stealing the identity of an American Armed Service veteran. The conviction resulted from an investigation by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement's Homeland Security Investigations with the assistance of the U.S. Department of State, Diplomatic Security Service, the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Inspector General, and the Social Security Administration's Office of Investigations. Castillo was sentenced to 24 months in prison and ordered to pay $21,000 to the federal government. In July of 2015, the defendant pled guilty to aggravated identity theft, wire fraud, passport fraud, theft of public money, and misuse of a social security number. Additional facts illustrate that Castillo was originally from Guatemala and entered the U.S. illegally in 1994. He illegally obtained a driver's license and social security card belonging to an American who was in the military at the time. In 2005, the defendant applied for a U.S. passport in the victim's identity. He then secured a job using the victim's identity and had his paycheck directly deposited into a bank account using the same victim's identity. He was later terminated from the job and began collecting unemployment benefits in the victim's identity. This slide defines telemarketing. Criminals hide behind the anonymity of the telephone in an attempt to defraud thousands of individuals each year. Impersonators pretend to be government officials and pretend to award lottery winnings to older adults. Some impersonate U.S. Customs officers and utilize customs-related schemes to defraud citizens of the U.S. ICE Homeland Security Investigations, with its foreign partners all over the world, work together to address this issue. Now, Donna Hatfield will tell you a little bit about some of the operations we do with other law enforcement all over the world.
Thank you, Carl. I'm Donna Hatfield, the National Program Manager for the Victim Assistance Program. One way in which HSI investigates these illegal telemarketers is through partnerships with foreign countries. For example, the Jamaican Operations Linked to Telemarketing, or JOLT, which was established in 2009, is an agreement between ICE and the Jamaican law enforcement. The goals are to facilitate the identification, investigation, and prosecution of telemarketers who are victimizing U.S. and Jamaican citizens. The goal is also to interdict and/or recover assets from violators, which then can be repatriated to the victims. as well as, finally, to identify other violations of laws enforced by HSI, including the laundering of proceeds of these frauds. Since 2009, 725 cases have been initiated, 345 individuals have been arrested, and over $2.8 million has been seized. Another successful investigative partnership HSI has entered into is with Canada. In 1999, HSI entered into partnership with Canadian law enforcement to develop Project COLT, Center for Operations Linked to Telemarketing. This is an initiative aimed at cracking down on telemarketing fraud originating from Canada. Project COLT has been a tremendous success. Since its launch in 1998 and through 2009, the initiative has led to the recovery and return of more than $6.3 million to the victims of telemarketing fraud. And now I'd like to turn this back over to Carl.
This slide defines lottery scams. As indicated on the slide, the classic prize pitch scams involve victims receiving notification by mail, phone, or email indicating they've won a prize. However, in order to collect the prize, the victim is required to pay various fees or taxes in advance. HSI, as well as many others, are responsible for conducting investigations of all types like this. This is the case of Damian Brian Barrett. In 2009, the United States Postal Inspection Service requested the assistance of Homeland Security Investigations special agents in Miami to assist with a JOLT investigation. Postal inspectors had received information that several elderly victims across the U.S. had been defrauded of several thousands of dollars after winning a sweepstakes. The initial investigation suggested that the fraud scheme was being conducted in the Montego Bay, Jamaica area. Realizing that this investigation was going to have international ties to Jamaica, HSI and the U.S. Postal Inspection Service initiated a joint investigation. During the course of the investigation, with the assistance of HSI's Attaché Kingston office and the Jamaican Constabulary Force, the special agents and postal inspectors were able to identify numerous victims throughout the U.S., as well as several co-conspirators in Jamaica and Florida. The co-conspirators were ultimately arrested, indicted, and subsequently pled guilty and were sentenced to imprisonment and had to pay restitution of more than $94,000. As a result of this case, the first Jamaican citizen was extradited to the U.S. to face fraud charges involving an international lottery scheme from a JOLT investigation. Some commonalities between Barrett's case and other lottery scams are that fraudsters typically reside in Jamaica, mostly in the Montego Bay area, and target elderly victims using lead lists that contain information on potential victims, including age, social security number, address, and phone number. Fraudsters then gather the trust of victims through numerous phone conversations. Once trust is established, victims start sending funds, usually via U.S. mail, FedEx, sometimes wire transfers, to pay for taxes or customs fees so that they can receive their winnings. Once victims become suspicious or stop sending funds, fraudsters start threatening victims with physical harm, violence, arrest, or even jail time. This slide defines phishing. Phishing is a general term for emails, text messages, and websites fabricated and used by criminals designed to look like they come from a well-known or trusted business, financial institution, or government agency in an attempt to collect personal, financial, and sensitive information. The messages may ask to verify personally identifiable information such as passwords, dates of birth, social security numbers, or other private information. If a potential victim has any suspicions, ask for the caller's contact information and tell them you will get back to them. You can then utilize the resources provided at the end of this presentation to confirm the information or report any suspicious activity. Mass marketing scams are also known as false charity scams or false advance fee scams. Fraud artists hope to profit from people's generosity. One way to avoid being duped is to verify a charity through the Better Business Bureau or through the Federal Trade Commission. Another mass marketing scam is known as the advanced fee fraud. In this instance, we found that some companies claim they can guarantee you a loan, even if individuals have a bad credit history or no credit rating at all. They usually request an upfront fee of several $100s. This slide lists out common direct mail marketing scams. Several of these target older adults. They include such things as prizes and sweepstakes, charities, lotteries, magazine sales, and even political campaign solicitations. Now I'd like to turn it back over to Donna Hatfield. So, Donna, tell us, why are adults particularly vulnerable?
Thank you, Carl. The older population is not homogeneous. It's one of the most diverse groups in society. Nonetheless, there are certain changes commonly associated with normal aging, as well as changes that might be expected as part of an aging-related health problem, such as Alzheimer's disease. All of these may make communication with a senior more challenging. As an agent, Carl, what are some of those challenges?
Older adults, as witnesses, may pose a challenge. For example, they typically range from 65 to 95 years old. Also, it may be challenging to identify folks who are willing to testify. With advanced age also brings issues related to memory loss, difficulty of travel, or just the embarrassment of being duped.
This slide discusses several financial exploitation scams that may target older adults. This list is not all-inclusive, but we will highlight some of the more serious schemes. The grandparent scheme, sweepstakes, investment scams, Nigerian emails, online dating, and we have a newer scam identified as a drug mule. Carl, please tell us more about the latest scam known as drug mule.
Homeland Security Investigations works very closely with its foreign partners to address the drug mule scam. The drug mule scam is similar to many other scams in that it first involves the fraudsters gaining the trust of the victim. Older adults have been the most popular targets of this type of scam. The fraudsters will promise the victim free travel overseas. When the victim agrees, and right before they are ready to travel, they are given a package to carry with them. The victim may be told it is for an ailing relative, and the victim agrees to bring it with them, not knowing the package contains illicit materials, usually drugs. Homeland Security Investigations investigates many of these types of crimes and has discovered that the drug mule scam is increasingly being used by global drug traffickers and cartels. Homeland Security Investigations oversees Operation Cocoon to counter the drug mule scam and save some older adult victims by stopping them before they leave the country.
This next slide references a scam that is so offensive. We call this the grandma scam. This type of scam is where these fraudsters target older adults by claiming to be their grandchildren, their nieces, nephews, grandnieces, grandnephews, and the whole intent is to prey upon their emotions as a grandparent to convince these older adults to send money to relatives who are in fact fraudsters. These fraudsters portray young relatives by claiming they're in an auto accident, they're in severe legal trouble, they've been injured severely, and they basically are asking for immediate help through MoneyGrams, through wiring money, and other sorts of money transfers. And even when some of these older adults question the caller by saying, "You don't sound like my grandchild," they have an answer. A lot of times they'll say things like, "Well, it's only because I'm under so much stress or I'm under so much trauma. That's why my voice sounds differently." And a lot of times, believe it or not, they can convince these older folks. To further illustrate how this scam has actually happened with an actual case, I'm going to refer it back now to Special Agent Arden, who's going to give us an example through a case where the grandma scam occurred.
This is a good example of a grandma scheme. Stephen Moskowin operated out of Canada, and Homeland Security Investigations worked with their colleagues in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to bring him to justice. Moskowin would contact an older adult victim and portray a young relative in dire need of assistance. Once Moskowin gained the trust of the older adult, he would ask them to send him money to assist with whatever the fabricated situation may be. A typical example of this might be that the young relative was in jail and needed money to get out. Moskowin would instruct the older adult victim to send money by money orders and prepaid debit cards. He would then convert these funds into virtual currency, such as Bitcoin, to further hide the illicit funds. In February of 2016, Moskowin pled guilty to money laundering charges in Miami federal court and faces up to 20 years in prison.
So now I want to talk a little bit about preventing financial exploitation. These next sets of slides are really going to be the do's and don'ts that we hope you're going to educate the folks that you encounter and that you will be working with to hopefully prevent financial exploitation. I'll start with some of the do nots and then we'll end on the do's. First, make sure you tell others not to write checks or send money to someone they simply don't know. That's like sending cash to somebody. Never agree to deposit a check from someone you don't know in exchange for you giving them money. Never play foreign lotteries. These are going to be scams. If you're told you've won a lottery or you've won a prize to a contest that has never been entered on that person's behalf, that's probably a scam as well. And finally, just because something is written online or you receive a letter in the mail, as we all know, please tell others this point. It doesn't mean it's true. Always look into it. So let's talk about some of the positive preventive steps that one can take. We're hoping that folks understand that constantly check bank accounts, bank statements, shred and destroy documents. Don't simply throw them in the trash and assume that they'll be in a landfill somewhere. A lot of criminals do go through garbage, believe it or not. They're looking for personal identifying information. Set up identity theft software on computers. Have it monitoring bank accounts. These are great ways to protect oneself. Those of you listening to this webinar are in great positions to tell others this other important information, such as know who you're dealing with, know that your monthly statements should be looked at carefully. Are there charges, are there deductions that were not authorized? When making a donation, only make donations to established charities. Oftentimes, after disaster, you may hear about cases where calls are being made to the elderly portraying themselves as the Red Cross or a foundation. But go directly to those individuals. Go to those websites. See if, in fact, it is an actual legitimate organization. And finally, don't buy health or medical products from someone who calls you. Go to your doctor with that information and ask your doctor, is this something I really need?
The next couple slides are designed to provide advice to older adults that they need to pay attention to their bills, bank statements, medical statements, and unusual or sudden changes to their credit. Pay attention. Victims may start to see withdrawals from their bank account that they cannot explain. They may also start to receive bills or other mail that's suspicious. Merchants may start to refuse their checks. They may start getting calls from debt collectors about debt that they did not incur. Or they may start to see unfamiliar accounts or charges on their credit report. We must also pay attention to medical bills for service that the victims may not use, or a health plan may start to reject legitimate medical claims. A health plan denies routine coverage. The IRS notifies the victim that more than one tax return was filed in his or her name. Or receiving notice that their information was compromised by a data breach at a company where they do business or have an account. Now I'd like to turn it back over to Scott to tell us a little bit about prosecuting financial exploitation crimes.
So let's just spend a couple of minutes talking about prosecuting these financial exploitation cases. In any prosecution, there has to be some sort of a tip or some sort of a proactive investigation. We're going to focus really on a referral or a tip coming to ICE or, quite frankly, any criminal investigative agency. In essence, what we're talking about is that a case will be referred to HSI from the actual victim. It could be a family member of the victim. It could be through the ICE tip line. It could be through a law enforcement partner. It could be through postal inspection. It could be from state or local law enforcement. But at that point, the case is going to be referred to a case agent. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Agent Arden to take it over.
Thank you, Scott. Well, the first thing we want to do is we want to identify the scope of the investigation. We want to look to see how many victims are involved, how many perpetrators, was there financial loss, and if so, how much. We then start to begin our investigation by gathering evidence. First thing we want to do is interview witnesses, potential victims, start looking at bank records by subpoenaing their accounts, start looking at other financial industries such as Western Union or MoneyGram for wire transfers. After the investigation is almost completed, we lead to our enforcement stage. During this part, we conduct search warrants, arrest warrants of our identified subjects, and take them in to face court. That leads to our next part, which is prosecution. That happens at the local United States Attorney's Office with the Department of Justice, ending ultimately, hopefully, with a conviction and a sentence.
We'd like to provide you with a list of resources on the next several slides, but I want to point out a couple more important ones for your clients or your victims, especially for those that have served in the military. The Military Consumer Protection Day is a joint initiative to empower active duty and retired service members, their family, veterans, and civilians in the military community. These are free resources as the first line of defense against fraud and make better informed decisions when managing your money. A second very important website is annualcreditreport.com, the official site to help consumers obtain their free yearly credit report. An additional resource is the Do Not Call list. This is the official government registration for all phone numbers that you have in your possession, including your landline, mobile phone, and fax numbers, if you would like to remove unwanted solicitors that call you on a daily basis. We have mentioned the Federal Trade Commission several times. The Federal Trade Commission is the federal government's Consumer Affairs Bureau to help all citizens with any consumer questions or to file consumer complaints. Should you have a client that has been victimized, please have them contact the Social Security Administration hotline. Finally, it is recommended that your clients also contact the Internal Revenue Service. The IRS does not initiate communications with taxpayers through email. We have provided you their 800 number and their hours of operation. Please contact the IRS if you have been a victim of identity theft.
Thank you, Donna, Scott, and Carl. This has been an incredible webinar. I hope you have found it useful and informative. We gave you our HSI's mission and its role investigating financial exploitation of older adults. We described types and possible causes of identity theft and why older adults are particularly vulnerable. Tips on preventing financial exploitation. I hope you found those very useful too. And certainly the challenges of prosecuting financial crimes. And we've given you real-world, devastating case examples. There are many resources that are available for victims of financial exploitation. Again, we thank you. We hope our time with you today has been useful and informative. Whether you are a victim advocate, a prosecutor, a victim specialist, law enforcement, or a victim of financial exploitation. So this concludes our webinar presentation on financial crimes and prevention and protection. But if you have any questions, please feel free to contact our Victim Assistance Program. And also available is the ICE tip line where you can report suspicious activity. Again, thank you so much.